Welcome to today's deep dive. Um, we are looking at something today that is, frankly, pretty wild. A devastating, global economy shaking war between the United States and Iran has, well, it's just been paused.
Yeah, paused is definitely the right word for it.
Right. But the agreement that actually stopped it isn't some massive, leather-bound treaty negotiated over 6 months in Geneva. It is a page-and-a-half document.
It's incredibly short.
14 points. I mean, that is literally shorter than the terms and conditions you blindly accept when, like, your smartphone updates its operating system.
It is stunningly brief.
Yeah.
And that brevity is really the first major clue about the reality of this situation. I mean, we need to ground this conversation right away by understanding what this document actually is.
Right.
Because it's merely a memorandum of understanding. It was brokered by Pakistan with mediation from Qatar and, other key Gulf nations who are feeling the immediate fallout.
The ones right next door.
Exactly. It is absolutely not a comprehensive peace treaty. What you're looking at is essentially a fragile pause button on a conflict that has dramatically destabilized the region.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because our mission today is to cut through the geopolitical noise of that page and a half. We want to show you, the listener, who really won here, what is actually in this agreement and how it directly impacts the global economy.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, means your wallet. Oh, and later we're going to tie in a completely distinct, slightly bizarre source note we received about the art of the irresistible outro.
I love that part.
It's so weird, but it surprisingly frames this whole situation perfectly.
It really does. But to start understanding how a 1.5-page document holds the entire global economy together,
Yeah.
we have to look at the most critical geographic feature in this whole conflict.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Because the impact of this war wasn't just felt in the Middle East. It rippled through supply chains worldwide.
Yeah, the source details how this massive global shipping lane was effectively closed by Iran for months during the conflict, which then prompted the U.S. to impose a blockade on Iranian ships. And now, under the terms of this new deal, commercial vessels and Iranian ships are, well, they're allowed to move freely again.
Which is huge.
It is, because when you hear Strait of Hormuz, I think your immediate assumption is, like, oil and gas.
Sure. Yeah.
And yes, a massive percentage of the world's energy flows through that narrow bottleneck, but the blockade stopped other crucial cargo too, specifically fertilizers.
Right, which is basically the hidden linchpin of the global food supply.
Exactly.
The mechanism here is terrifyingly simple. If you block the strait,
Yeah.
fertilizer shipments, they just cannot reach global markets.
Yeah.
And when farmers worldwide don't get fertilizer, crop yields plummet. I mean, the BBC breakdown highlights that there were entirely valid fears of skyrocketing global food prices and, widespread hunger strictly because of this one geographic bottleneck.
Right.
It takes a matter of months, maybe less, for a geopolitical blockade to show up as a massive price hike at your local grocery store.
That paints a very, very different picture of modern power, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we picture 21st century warfare as this high-tech, satellite-guided, multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
Yeah, lasers and drones.
Right. Yet here, the ultimate leverage was achieved by essentially, I don't know, putting a cork in a waterway. It's like geography defeating technology.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the true revelation of this war for the Iranian government. Because they discovered a new, incredibly potent weapon.
That wasn't a bomb.
No, it wasn't a nuclear warhead or anything.
Yeah.
The realization that they possess the geographic power to hold the entire global economy hostage.
Wow.
They proved they can disrupt global food and energy markets just by closing their doors. And that is leverage they get to keep, regardless of what any memorandum says.
See, that realization makes the timeline of this war look entirely different to me. Because since Iran clearly held this massive economic leverage, I have to wonder how they maintained it, despite facing what looks, at least on paper, like a devastating U.S. military campaign.
Right, the bombings.
Yeah, I mean, the war began in late February with U.S. and Israeli attacks. The U.S. conducted thousands of bombing raids, hitting nuclear and military targets. They completely sank the Iranian Navy early on.
They did.
And crucially, they killed the long-ruling supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Yep.
So if a country loses its entire navy, its infrastructure is heavily bombed, and its supreme leader is killed. I mean, to a layperson, that looks like a definitive loss. How did the Iranians still manage to drive a hard bargain and force a ceasefire on their terms?
Well, you were looking at it through the lens of traditional conventional warfare.
Okay.
In a conventional war, sure, destroying the enemy's capital ships and eliminating their leader is checkmate. game over.
All right.
But that is not how asymmetric warfare works. Let's break down the mechanisms of how Iran actually survived this. First, regarding the leadership. The U.S. did not achieve regime change.
Right, the government didn't fall.
Exactly. Yes, Ayatollah Khamenei was killed, but killing a leader doesn't dismantle an entire entrenched bureaucracy. The succession plan was immediate. He was literally replaced by his son right away.
So the structure itself didn't collapse at all. If anything, I mean, an external threat, like a massive bombing campaign, often unifies a regime's power structure, doesn't it?
It does.
It gives them the ultimate excuse to crack down on any internal dissent in the name of, like, national security.
Precisely. According to the sources, the regime became even more entrenched in the aftermath. The external threat basically solidified their grip.
Wow. Okay, so that's the leadership. What about the military side?
Right, so second, let's talk about the Navy.
Hmm.
Sinking the Iranian Navy was a specific, massive military achievement for the U.S. But it didn't neutralize Iran's strategic capability at all. Because you don't need large warships to control a narrow body of water like the Strait of Hormuz. Iran simply pivoted to using swarms of small, highly maneuverable fast boats.
Oh, I see. It's a massive cost exchange imbalance.
Exactly.
You can't effectively sink a swarm of 100 cheap speedboats using million-dollar conventional naval missiles without, like, totally exhausting your arsenal and your budget.
That's like a bear fighting a swarm of hornets.
That's a great analogy.
Right. The bear is immensely more powerful, but the hornets are just too numerous and decentralized. Furthermore, despite the thousands of bombing raids on their infrastructure, Iran maintained the capability to continuously fire missiles at the Gulf right up until the very end of the war.
Right up until the ceasefire.
Yep. They proved that you don't need a traditional big-budget military to inflict unacceptable economic pain. You just need enough localized chaos to make shipping companies basically refuse to sail through the strait.
That relentless resilience really explains why Donald Trump, despite making public threats to resume bombing if Iran, quote-unquote, didn't behave, ultimately wanted a way out.
Yeah, the Iranians knew he was looking for an off-ramp.
So let's look at the actual duct tape holding this situation together. What exactly did both sides agree to in these 14 points?
Well, the primary point is a ceasefire on all fronts. And the phrase all fronts is the operative mechanism here.
Meaning everywhere.
Yes, including Lebanon, which the BBC notes was a strict, non-negotiable red line for Iran.
Okay, explain that.
So Iran insisted that the ceasefire cover the Iranian-backed group currently fighting Israel and Lebanon. They essentially used their massive leverage in the Gulf to protect their proxy thousands of miles away.
That's incredible. But wait, the core catalyst for years of tension leading up to this war, that was the nuclear issue.
Right.
Where does that stand in a page-and-a-half document?
In the agreement, Iran reiterates its commitment not to develop nuclear weapons. But more tangibly, Iran has agreed to dilute some of their currently enriched material.
Dilute it.
Yes. This is material that isn't quite bomb grade yet, but is alarmingly close to that threshold.
Let's actually pause and explain the mechanism of what that means, because the context of this enrichment is so vital.
It really is.
Under the 2015 deal brokered by President Barack Obama, Iran was strictly limited to enriching uranium to about 3.6%, right?
Right.
And enrichment basically means spinning uranium gas in centrifuges to separate the heavier, stable isotopes from the lighter combustible ones you need for a reaction.
Right, concentrating the active part.
But after Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from that agreement, Iran aggressively ramped up those centrifuges.
They enriched it to levels that genuinely alarmed the international community. Because going from 3.6% to, say, 20% or 60%, it isn't just a linear step.
It's not just basic math.
No, the physics dictate that once you reach those higher percentages, the jump to 90%, which is weapons grade, requires significantly less time and effort. So now, the agreement states that Iran must dilute this highly enriched material. They literally have to mix it back down with lower grade material.
Got it.
And UN inspectors must go back into the country to verify everything on the ground.
Which means setting up cameras, taking physical samples, auditing the facilities. I mean, that is highly technical, deeply complex logistical work.
Very much so.
And this is where the timeline in the document becomes terrifying, because they don't have years to figure this out.
No, they don't. And what's fascinating here is the sheer volume of massive unanswered variables hanging over this brief document. For example, the agreement includes a staggering $300 billion reconstruction fund to rebuild Iran.
Wait, $300 billion. Let's just sit with that number for a second. That is massive.
Yes. It is. Yet President Trump has emphatically insisted that U.S. taxpayers will not pay a single cent into this fund.
Okay, so the obvious question is, where is the money coming from?
The source explicitly states that right now, nobody actually knows.
You're kidding.
Nope. It is an unfunded mandate sitting right in the middle of a ceasefire agreement. And, to make matters more stressful, Iran's primary goal, which is actual permanent sanctions relief, is entirely dependent on them meeting these complex nuclear dilution commitments.
And verifying them.
Yes, all of this has to be verified and negotiated in an incredibly short 60-day window.
So what does this all mean? If I can offer an analogy, this 1.5-page document isn't a peace treaty at all. It's like a real estate escrow agreement.
Oh, that's a really good way to put it.
Right. The sanctions relief and the phantom $300 billion are supposedly locked in a vault somewhere, and this 60-day window is just the inspection period. If the UN inspectors don't sign off on the nuclear dilution, or if the money just doesn't materialize, the whole deal falls through, escrow cancels, and everyone goes back to war.
That is an incredibly accurate way to view it. The BBC analysis points out there's enormous scope for misunderstandings here. The 60-day clock can be extended by mutual consent, but realistically, Iran is likely going to play the long game.
They'll drag it out.
Oh, absolutely. They will string this out to maximize their leverage, knowing full well the U.S. and the Gulf states are desperate to keep those shipping lanes open. It is a diplomatic minefield.
Wow. But, while the politicians and negotiators are arguing over centrifuge enrichment percentages and where $300 billion is going to magically appear from, we have to look at the human cost.
Yes, we do.
Because buried in this treaty is a mutual agreement, quote, not to interfere in each other's affairs.
Right.
And on its face, that sounds like standard diplomatic boilerplate, right? Like, we won't mess with your domestic politics, you don't mess with ours. But the practical implications for the actual people living in Iran are devastating.
To understand why, you have to look at what happened right before the war started.
In January.
Right, back in January, massive nationwide protests erupted across Iran. And this wasn't just a minor disturbance. It started out as outrage over severe economic problems, inflation, unemployment, lack of resources.
Basics of living.
Exactly. But it rapidly morphed into a full-scale uprising against the regime itself. The protests spread across the entire country, and the regime responded with brutal, crushing force.
And at the time, President Trump made highly public promises to help those Iranian protesters. He signaled that the U.S. was standing behind their push for freedom.
He did.
But now, with this non-interference clause signed and sealed in this new document, those promises are effectively voided. The U.S. legally cannot support them under the terms of this deal.
This raises an important question about the profound psychological toll this entire ordeal has taken on the Iranian populace. The BBC source captures their current state pretty bluntly. They are despondent.
Completely hopeless.
Yeah, they have been left in an impossible, deeply tragic situation.
It's the ultimate geopolitical paradox for them.
Yeah.
You have citizens who are caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, many of them absolutely hated the devastation the war brought to their cities and their economy. I mean, nobody wants bombs dropping on their neighborhoods.
Of course not.
But on the other hand, secretly, many of them held out a sliver of hope that this immense military conflict might finally spell the end of a regime they desperately wanted out. They hoped the external pressure would fracture the government's control.
But instead, the exact opposite happened.
Yeah.
The war provided the ultimate cover for the regime to tighten its grip. I mean, the people suffered all the horrors of a military conflict, only to emerge on the other side with a government that used the chaos to become even more deeply entrenched.
It's heartbreaking.
The source notes that executions are currently being carried out. The regime is cleaning house under the guise of post-war security, and the Iranian people are living in deep fear that human rights will be respected even less now than they were before the conflict even began.
So they paid the horrific price of a war, but reaped none of the systemic change they hoped for. The geopolitical chessboard moves on, the shipping lanes reopen, but millions of people are left trapped under that tightened grip.
And that tension, that unresolved, tightly coiled pressure within the country, combined with the vague, unfunded promises of the agreement, is exactly why the next few weeks are so critical.
Yeah.
There is a vast amount of global goodwill, especially from Gulf countries desperately needing stability, invested in making this 60-day window work. But the foundation of the deal is built on shifting sand.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle we promised you earlier. We
ISIS.
received a strange little note as part of our source material. It was just a single line from a document titled The Art of the Irresistible Outro.
So random.
So random. The note simply said, make the outro so interesting that peoples want to watch the next video.
A little meta advice for content creation sneaking its way into a geopolitical analysis.
But wait, actually, here's where it gets really interesting. If we apply that advice literally to the current geopolitical landscape, the next video in this global series is whatever happens over the next 60 days of these highly unpredictable negotiations.
That's very true.
The world is forced to watch because the economic stakes are simply too high to look away.
And applying that lens leaves you with a deeply unsettling final thought to consider.
Okay, what is it?
We noted earlier that Iran's greatest takeaway from this entire conflict was the realization that shutting down the Strait of Hormuz is their absolute most potent weapon.
Right, the geography over technology thing.
Exactly. They survived a massive, technologically superior conventional military assault by simply threatening a geographic global economic artery. So, what happens if this 60-day escrow period fails?
Oh, wow.
If the UN inspectors find a violation, or the $300 billion never appears, and the duct tape breaks? Will the next major global conflict even bother with traditional military bombings?
That's a scary thought.
Or will it bypass the battlefield entirely and jump straight to an immediate, devastating economic siege? What does it mean for the future of world peace when a country realizes that simply exploiting its local geography is vastly more powerful than its entire military?
It is a chilling question, and it's exactly why you need to keep a very close eye on the Gulf as that 60-day clock ticks down. How those negotiations play out will dictate the price of your groceries, the stability of the Middle East, and really the future of how wars are fought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the forces shaping our world. We'll be right here, waiting when the next chapter unfolds.